Pleasure to be here. I'm Diane Huffman, President of Women's Sport International. And it is a gloomy day, but it's very nice and warm. So I'm not upset about the weather at all. So let's enjoy today and enjoy the weather. Sometimes some people believe that the rain brings you good luck. So that's what we're going to believe today, that the rain is luck. So I'd like to start this session with just introducing you to the objectives of what we wanted to achieve today. And then I'll introduce you to this wonderful panel. So together as a panel, we came up with 4 main objectives. And these are researchers and practitioners, examples of researchers and practitioners working together and how they can create change. An example of approaches to improve outcomes for women as coaches and leaders through partnerships and monitoring practices. And then an example of the role that international multi-sport organizations can advance opportunities for women. And last, it's driving gender equity in sport, leadership and governance, looking at the connection and the role of data, evidence, and monitoring in changing policy to impact gender equality in sport. So those are what we're hoping that our panelists will answer some or provide examples of for you today. So I'll now introduce you to the panel. And it is a very diverse group from different parts of the world. And we'll start with Lucy Piggott. And she's the Associate Professor in Sports Science at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Sociology of sport. And she's located in Trondheim, Norway. And then we have Rachel Matt. She's Project Impact Manager at Tofisa. And she's located in Frankfurt, Germany. And we have Sergei Lizhin. He's the Project Manager at the Association of Summer Olympic International Federation, which is quite an interesting organization, and he'll explain what that organization is for those of you who don't know. And then we have Aya Noguchi, and Aya is the Deputy Director of the International Research Center for Sport and Gender Equity at the University of Seijo in Japan. And last we have Olivia Conrad, and she is the Senior Project Officer for the All In Plus. It's a program promoting greater gender equality in sport, and it's a joint effort between the EU and the Council of Europe. So welcome. I'm looking forward to monitoring this group. We're going to start with just the 3 presenters. They'll present first, and then we'll have 15 minutes of directed questions. I'm sorry there won't be time for the audience to pose questions, but you'll have that chance to talk to all of them at the break. So please save your questions for afterwards. And then we will move to the other 2, our last 2 speakers, and again have 15 minutes for questions. So hopefully you'll enjoy this whole process and learn something today. I'll start with Lucy. I'll call it Lucy if you'd like to join here, and I'll take your seat.
Thank you. I'm gonna, the mic's working. I'm not very good at standing still, so I'm gonna use the roaming mic. But thanks, Diane, and good morning, everyone. So I've been researching on this topic, gender inclusion in sport organisations, since I started my PhD back in 2015. And since then, I've been researching this topic with national and international federations, esports organisations, and most recently, sport for development and peace organisations. And today, I want to give a very brief overview of where are we at currently, what's being done about it, and importantly, what do we need to do moving forwards. So let's start with the numbers then, and let's start on a positive note. So in some national contexts, we are seeing increases in the representation of women in sport, leadership, and governance positions. So if we look at my current country, Norway, we can see that over a period of 35 years, we've had substantial increases in the number of women on sport boards from 15% back in 1985 all the way up to 44% in 2020. Similarly, in my home country, England, we can see that over a period of just 7 years, we've seen a substantial increase from 22% back in 2012 all the way up to 40% in 2019. Now, it's important to note that in both of these national contexts, very specific measures have been implemented that have resulted in this increase in women's representation. So within Norway, quite famously, gender quotas, and in England, gender representation targets that are linked to funding. However, when we're celebrating success at this national level, we do need to be a bit cautious. Because unfortunately, in other national contexts, we still have a low representation of women on boards. For example, on national sport boards in India, just 8% women. In China, 12% women. Brazil, 15%, and Russia, 17%. If we move then to the international level, we can see that women are also still underrepresented, but this is improving. So in 2019, if we look at international sport organizations, in 2021, just 7% of presidents or chairs were women, just 21% of CEOs or secretary generals, and just 22% women on boards or executive committees. So we can see there's definitely work to be done. However, ASRIF's report was published this year, and I'm pleased to say that the statistics within that report show that we are moving in the right direction. So the numbers are improving, but change is slow. Now, for anybody working in this sector, you'll know that the numbers aren't enough. We need to move beyond the numbers and also look at, okay, increasingly more women have got a seat at the board table, but does that equate to a voice to make change? Does it mean that women are influencing decision-making within their organizations? So if we look at the UK context, myself and my colleague Philippa Valia, we edited this book back in 2022, and we found that a broad finding across the chapters was that multi-level challenges do still exist for gender inclusion in sport leadership. So at the formal structural level, there's still gendered formal practices and rules. At the cultural level, there's still informal norms and expectations that privilege men and masculinity. And at the individual level, some women sport leaders still have challenges in balancing home life with leadership positions and challenges with self-confidence and so on. A result of these multi-level challenges is the gender pay gap. And Philippa found, for example, that within organizations that specifically work with men's competitive sport, women on average earned 60% less than men. Additionally, when we're looking at both the challenges on the one hand, but also the successes on the other hand, we need to really question to what extent do these represent all women? Because Elena Simpkin's work finds that Black women sport leaders face unique challenges due to combined gendered but also racialized stereotypes, norms, expectations, and so on that can lead some Black women to feel othered within their organizations despite holding leadership or governance positions. So we can see then that a range of challenges still exist. So what are we doing about it? Well, in 2021, these strategies and measures that are on the board were the main things that were being implemented by international sports organizations. And you can see from the percentages that the implementation of these varied across organizations. Now, I think most are fairly self-explanatory, but just to be clear, reference to gender and governance in official documents, that ranged from maybe just a short statement or a paragraph in a broad strategy document to a dedicated gender or EDI strategy. And gender or EDI groups varied from working groups to commissions or committees. So we saw that it was positive. You can see that a range of strategies and measures are being implemented, and gender quotas, for example, by 70% of organizations. But again, we need to not just look at what's being done, but is it creating change? Is it being effective? And is there genuine commitment to achieving these? So in doing so, we also looked at what are some of the limitations or the need for improvement with some of these strategies and measures. And we found, for example, that most of the targets lacked timeframes. So if you have a target without a time frame, how do you monitor or evaluate success over time to see if you're actually reaching that target? With quotas, there was a lack of compliance measures. So if the quotas weren't being met, there was no consequence. A lot of the references to gender equity and governance were non-specific. So as an organization, we're committing to gender inclusion, but we're not saying specifically how we're going to achieve that. And also different group types influence impact differently. So a working group's quite informal and time limited, whereas a commission or a committee is more embedded and reports directly to the board. So based on these limitations then, just a few brief recommendations on next steps. What do we need to do? So we need these measures and strategies to be smart. We need them to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. The challenges happen at different levels, so the strategies also need to match that. And we're doing pretty well at the formal structural level, so quotas, targets. We're doing pretty well at the individual level, and we're going to see that with women's leadership development programs. But how about that cultural level? How can we address culture? And finally, and hopefully we can talk about this on the panel, how can we collaborate more effectively between researchers and practitioners on things like addressing culture? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I guess we'll switch. These are her references, so I'm not sure, will the presentations be available to all of the members here today? Lombi or anybody? Yes. So if you want copies of the presentations, they'll be available for you. So I'd like to introduce Rachel now. So Rachel, if you'd like to come up.
Hi, yes, thank you very much, Diane. And yeah, I think Lucy's presentation was the perfect preview into what I'm going to be discussing today. So today I'm going to be presenting TAFISA's Girls Positive and Safe Coaching Pathway. This is a program that we have to address gender equity in specifically for women and girls in sport through their coaches. And I think with this theme of this session today of confidence, women's leadership and confidence in sport, I think that sport, we can agree, is an ideal place for women and girls to build that. So just to give a short background on TAFISA, so we are the Association for International Sport for All. We have just under 400 members in 170 countries. And this was a key way that we were able to, with this first pilot year of the program, be able to have access to members all over the world. This Girls Positive and Safe Coaching Pathway is just one of our capacity building programs. So to talk a little bit more about what this pathway was. So it is designed to address gender inequity that hinders the participation of women and girls in sport at all levels. We wanted to focus on training the coaches so that they could help to remove barriers and create a more equitable, accessible, and positive experience for women and girls in sport. The training focused on 4 different modules about how to get and keep girls playing in sport, so the recruitment and retainment, body talk in sport, which included topics like body confidence, safeguarding in sport for all. This was something that was key for the host organizations as well as for the coaches, to set up the safeguarding not only in the host organization, but also the pathways that they would follow when there was any issues, and coaching her about just how to be the best coach for girls that they could be. In this first year, we targeted 3 different kinds of organizations. So we looked at international sport organizations, so the same sport, but multiple locations, regional bodies containing multiple countries and with really different levels of sport, and then country-specific organizations that were working at more local levels. The flow of the program was that TAFISA would train 2 people from each of these organizations. We had 14 partners, and then these organizations would put on their own capacity building trainings or trainings, and in the end, then these coaches would take the trainings to the girls, and we would see what happened. So we're still in progress. We had thought that we might be collecting some 3-month data now, but we wanted to work with the organizations on their timeline, and I'll get to that in a second. So overall, we were able to reach and exceed our target groups. So already we have been able to coach over 500 coaches, and the organizations have really enjoyed the program so much that they're doing ongoing and additional trainings outside of what was required. We saw great, the numbers for the coaches were great. We had over 75% female coaches. They were teaching at the grassroots and the school level. They were coming from both volunteer and paid positions, and also in kind of the key age groups of ages 25 to 44. They really enjoyed the training. They had an overall increase in their knowledge. And what was also key was that the host organizations really engaged with the training as well. So they, especially the safeguarding, this was something that they kind of had to get everything in order to present on safeguarding to their coaches. They had to have this pathway and all the information necessary for that. The other key finding that we saw was that the coaches were really excited to learn about this topic. So it was something that they obviously saw in their coaching day-to-day, but no one had ever taken the time to work specifically with it. We had a lot of coaches go immediately back to their communities and start initiatives and programs. But the other big thing was that they were very excited to work with the host organizations in a different way. So not just the necessarily top-down of the higher level organization going down to the coaches, but they got a chance to kind of work up with the organization in a different way outside of just sport. This blue used to be red, and that was the non-response for surveys. So we did have some challenges, and so for our monitoring and evaluation, we had a pre, a post, and then a 3-month post. And we had some issues with, getting the exact right people that were answering the pre-survey. Sometimes they weren't people who ended up going through the program, but also that we had some language barriers with it. So everything was, we were working with our organizations and their trainers, and everything was in English. And then once we got down to the community and grassroots levels, the English materials were not always sufficient. So that's something that we'll be adapting for next year. And something that was a little bit mixed was the extended timeline. So as I mentioned, we're still collecting data for this program. We really had to adapt to the organizations. It's difficult to get 20, 30 coaches into a room all at once for 2 days, so we had to adapt to when they already were bringing coaches together. And that's something that we'll continue to do, as well as that there was a mixed method for engaging the coaches. When we first envisioned the program, it was a 2-day training with time for all the modules, but it's not always possible to bring people together for that long, especially with funding limitations. So sometimes they had a 1-day training, sometimes they had mixed online, and we just had to engage with that. So what did we learn? So we are having a second round. So our pilot is going to be complete probably in the early 2025 months, and then what did we learn for next time? So we're now expanding to an open call for applications. So this is, we want organizations to come to us with the plan for how they want to implement this. It was great to reach to the organizations directly, but this is how we're pivoting this year. And we're also collecting a lot of information about what was worked well for the host organizations and for the coaches themselves. So we'll have some focus groups as well as be able to fully analyze the data that we do have from the coaches to make sure that we're adapting the training to them. Integration with existing frameworks. So as I mentioned with safeguarding, we want to make this framework a part of the organization's long-term strategy. We want to keep this program sustainable over the years and have this be integrated. And alongside that, it's the continental trainers. So while Tafisa was here training this time all the trainers, we want to make sure that we're adapting to the local context and that is in line with the translating materials as well. So we're going to be adapting examples and really getting some more engagement from the coaches as to what they need to hear. And the final point I have is establishing a network of advocates, trainers, and alumni. And this was something that we were a bit surprised to find, but it shouldn't be surprising because it's very similar to what we talked about today, what Ben mentioned in his opening, is that just bringing people together to talk about things is just as beneficial as us having this capacity building of educating them. So coaches were thrilled to just be able to be in a room with other coaches that are doing the same things, having the same problems they are, and they were able to really work together to solve that. So we want to build a network that they can have and support one another just like we're doing today. And so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel.
Yeah, I think I will speak from here. So good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think it's important to give a brief introduction to what ASOIF is, because not even people sometimes working in sport know about us, and we often get confused with the IOC or with the Olympic Solidarity, but we are an association of international federations that compete in the Summer Olympic Games. So we are there to unite and to support these federations. To start, maybe like our project, it was when the IOC first announced their recommendation to international federations to have at least 30% of women representative on their governing boards. And back then we saw that this will be an opportunity for us to support our members, because already then we could see that many international federations would have 15% or less women representation on the leadership roles. So we partnered with internationally recognized leadership coach, Gabriela Müller, who already had her own program for women in leadership in sport, which was last for 4 weeks. We at ASOIF cover participation fee for 1 woman per federation, so ensuring that every sport can be represented on the program, but also giving options to federations. If they want to register more women, that would be at their own cost, at their own investment. This program teaches women leadership skills that help them either to win an election, or if they were recently elected or appointed, to serve in this elective position with confidence. So those are self-confidence, executive leadership, negotiation, networking, and stakeholder management. After consecutive 4 years of us providing this program, we have more than 300 participants from our leadership initiative. And we witnessed some really amazing examples, remarkable success stories. Petra Sorling became the first ITTF, the first female president of International Table Tennis Federation in 2021. Lisa Allen, 3 years after her graduation from our program, she became the first female Secretary General in the history of International Judo Federation. Sometimes we even see the women transferring, the graduates transferring from sports sector to public sector, with Jasmine Mayan, who served on the Canada Wrestling Board of Directors, was the youngest woman ever elected to Calgary City Council when she was at the age of 31. Another interesting example I really wanted to share was Alison Creek. She was a board member of Rowing Australia, and after 1.5 years of her graduation, she was appointed the president of Paralympics Australia. And shortly after her appointment, we met at the International Paralympic Committee General Assembly. We had a quick chat, and she said, well, I knew how to lead people because I was a brigadier in the Australian Army. What your program really helped me with was understand how the sport politics works. And also we've seen many other examples, women driving projects for girls in sports on a local level, or winning their elections on the national federation level. So these all, I think, build the success of our leadership program. But at the same time, it would be naive to say that everything always goes as planned, because our graduates still lose their election, but what makes me glad is that they're no longer afraid of defeat. They have an appetite, they're already planning their next election campaigns, so and this in a way normalizes women's presence in the sport politics in the leadership. Sometimes it's for political reasons that federations cannot really fully empower their women. Like one federation told me, we have an election this year. If we send some candidates and they win an election, the losing candidates might challenge us, so we're interfering in the election process. So to avoid these internal problems, they just will probably send their staff to the program, which is still not a bad thing, because these principles women can benefit on every level, including the staff. And I've shown the picture of Lisa Allen. She used to be a competition manager, so now she transferred into the Secretary General role. So there are pathways for these women, but they're not as quick, as effective maybe for those for who we're targeting this program. I would also say one of the most positive outcomes for me in that program is that many IFs managed to identify their female leaders across the world, and now they have them on their radar. Normally, in order to select their participant that will be subsidized by ASUIF, they organize an application process for their national members, receiving multiple applications from women in different countries, like 20 and more. And then they come back to me saying like, hey, we identified 5 excellent women. We cannot really select one. Can we send all 5 to your program? So this is really a positive thing. And maybe to conclude my presentation, I just wanted to highlight that this is completely replicable program that anyone can do. I know that our coach Gabriela delivered similar programs for a group of Caribbean Olympic committees. She did it for United World Wrestling. She did it for Canoeing Federation when they organized alongside their general assemblies or congresses, like women-specific discussions. And even in winter sports, I think it was bobsleigh and biathlon who joined their resources and organized one event for women leaders from both of that sports. So yeah, I invite everyone just to look into this kind of existing programs. And if you have these on your target list, just use them because they really work. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's quite an interesting program. So now we will have some questions. So we'll take, I guess, we still have 15 minutes for questions. And I'd like to start with, what I'll do is ask each panelist one question, but then when they've responded, the other panelists, if we still have time, we'll give some input to their response. So I'll start with Lucy, and I guess the research is not often readily available to practitioners. This is one of the big issues, and why we're here today is to bring practitioners and researchers together. So from your findings as a researcher actually working with practitioners, what do you see as some of the key challenges in achieving gender equity? And how do you see researchers and practitioners working more effectively together?
Yeah, I think the key challenge that I feel still exists is what I talked about briefly at the end of my presentation, which is how do we address culture and problematic cultures, because the very nature of culture is that it's the informal, it's the unspoken, and sometimes it's the invisible. It's just the way that it is, and the way that it's been in some instances for 200 years. And as I said, I think we're doing some quite good work at the sort of formal and individual levels, but not really seeing so much at that cultural level. So I think that's an area that researchers and practitioners can work better together. For example, cultural auditing. So cultural auditing is something that's being done a bit within safe sport. We've got a bird in the room. A bit within safe sport, a bit within high-performance sports. But from what I'm aware, I haven't really seen it from a gender-specific perspective. So how can researchers and practitioners work together to identify where an organization wants its culture to be, where it is currently, and what we need to do to bridge that gap? And I think that if researchers and practitioners are working together from the very start of research projects to collaborate on the design, on the choice of methods, on who needs to be observed or interviewed, on how we disseminate the findings, then I think we're on to something. I've got experience of working with UK sport in this regard, and it was a really positive experience. A big part of that positive experience is that I worked with one fantastic individual, Jem Browning, for those of you who know her. She's not only hugely passionate about this topic, but she also has some influence within her organization to create change. So I think that's another thing we need to kind of think about as researchers. Who do we need to work with that actually has the power to implement change? UK Sport were fantastic in using their resources and their people to develop infographics and different ways of disseminating our findings. And UK Sport publicly committed to implementing some of our recommendations, specifically around networking. So if there's that collaboration where there's a genuine commitment to creating change, both from researchers and practitioners, and you're constantly in conversation about how to make this research effective for the organization and its needs, then I think we can improve things.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have comments?
I said no, just, yeah, fully agreed. I think that finding those key people that can, we call them a lot of times heroes in capacity building, that, you know, the heroes who can kind of make these programs work is absolutely key.
So links to the ambassadors program, and there you can see there is a real tendency for people who have successful experience to showcase what they've been through. And this is all about communication issues, and it links to what Lucy said.
So thank you, Lucy, and the rest of the panelists. So Rachel, your program is very interesting, and one of the things that I picked up from it is that you've been very flexible in your approach. And I guess the flexibility is based on how you're monitoring and evaluation, how you're monitoring and evaluating. It seems to be an important part of TAFISA's program. And as a practitioner, the role of this data and listening, I found you were listening very closely to what your partners and your target audience were asking for, what issues they were struggling with. This seems to be a key strategy in moving your program forward. So I'd like to compliment you on that. In your presentation, you identified the challenges presented both by the organizational partners a bit and the participants. So what do you think is needed to overcome the barriers, and how do you envision the long-term impact on gender equity?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so being flexible with the monitoring and evaluation was at first a little bit difficult, but then once we were able to design it, especially next year, in a way that would be even more fitting to what's actually happening on the ground, I think that we'll even have better information. I want to start off just from kind of the same theme, talk about what the participants said. So our top 3 barriers for when we asked participants after the training, what do you think are the top 3 barriers to you actually implementing this program in your training, in your coaching. The top 3 were financial barriers, which I think is in sport programs always comes up, and it's something where I think I do see where monitoring and evaluation could help. The more that we create really quantifiable change is something that then we can translate that into applications and grants. But also the qualitative, content that organizations can get out of it, that if they can see that doing this will result in a more better program, hopefully that could affect some financial constraints. The other one was the lack of awareness and access. So this is something that directly the capacity building can affect. But the access also points to policy change. That's something else that we're really moving forward in the program, is that we know that long-term change happens when you have policy change. So we need the organizations to change their policies, adapt their policies, make sure they're constantly updating to meet the new struggles of women and girls in sport. And the third most popular barrier was the resistance from athletes and parents. So we really want to understand this a little bit more when we talk to the participants. We want to figure out exactly what they might mean by this. But I can imagine that just the more that we can change the perception of women and girls in sport, and this might just take time. This must take, people going through sport longer, people who did sport when they were younger, more likely to have their kids go through sport, all this stuff. So those are the ways right now that we have of changing the barriers, but we'll continue listening to what the coaches need and what they feel that the women and girls they coach need as well.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add?
Yeah, I really like the project that you're managing, and I do believe personally that we should address the problem of women being coaches in a strategic way, because not always, we can expect from families or school to play this role, to bring this, understanding that women can be powerful positions. And this is where the sport coaches can play their role. If we imagine a group of, boys be coached by a woman, then those boys growing in an ecosystem where a woman is valued as a source of authority, of respect, of knowledge, which make them better, then even if, in certain countries, for example, in school and families, they don't get this understanding, through the sport ecosystem they can have it, and once they grow, for them it will not be a major issue having a female president or female coach and so on. So I really do think that this is the right approach.
Just quickly, I think that also coaches needs to be trained sometimes. And definitely, they are probably good in teaching sports, they're experts, but definitely these programs can help them making a better outcome for these women at the end, these athletes. And we see a tendency that women sometimes are afraid to go in this path, but then when they go at the end of the path and the training, they really exceed, and they're great in doing what they do. So sometimes it's just a lack of opportunities for them, and we need to encourage them on many occasions, on many opportunities to go there and to exceed.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree that a lot of the coaches that we had in the program did have formal coach education, but it doesn't have, I don't think, much to do with gender equity. So yeah, getting them trained also in, they can be experts in their sport, but experts in recruiting and retaining and how to speak is all really huge for coaches.
Thank you. Serge, this program that you're running is a very good program, and particularly for women who are already in fairly high positions, giving them more effective skills, like as you were saying, political understanding of the politics within sport and how to deal with that. So It seems like an excellent program, but based on your learnings over the last 4 or 5 years that you've been working with this project, what do you think are the challenges we need to overcome to enhance systems in organizations such that they will engage these empowered women? Because often we have many empowered women. We have many programs that empower women, but where are the women? We've just seen some statistics on this. So what do you think are the main challenges, and how do you think we could overcome them?
Thank you, Diane. This is really a tough question because from my perspective, since I work on the international federation level, I really see the shift was like already done. You know, the reason that you no longer need to explain international federation why this is important, why we need to have women, what they bring to the boards, what they bring to the success of our organizations. And I would say mostly they genuinely try to get more women elected naturally into their boards and decision-making positions. I think the difficulty really lies, as we referenced several times today, on the cultural level, because this brought to my memory, like when I was in Tokyo for the Olympic Games, and I was in table tennis event, and I've noticed that there were a lot of female judges officiating the tournament. And I asked my colleagues, like, how come like, most IFs struggling having women technical officials, and you have plenty of them? And they explained me that in Japan there is extremely high level of technical officials among females, but very, very few of them pursue international career because they stick more to their families and they don't want to, you know, like put one against another. So I think this is where really will be the next big challenge to address, is that like, can we change the culture so to change the entire system? Because yeah, this is I think where we have now the biggest problem with that.
Yeah, I completely agree, as I've sort of already alluded to as well. And I think with programs like yours, great programs that are working to empower women leaders, it's also a question of how do we ensure organizational buy-in and commitment to some of those programs. And I've worked on the Women's Sport Leadership Academy for high performance coaches, and Women's Sport Leadership Academy, which I is a graduate of. And I know there's a few people in the room who are also linked to Whistler. And one of the key sort of focuses of Whistler is to have that organizational buy-in, and particularly with the high performance coaches program, the international federations involved had to have their own strategies alongside it. So they had to have a mentorship system in place for the coaches, and they had to have a strategic action plan in place for every woman on the program. And we found that that then ensured that, as you said, it's not just empowering women to then be left to their own devices in a problematic system, but actually the organizations involved had to commit to also changing the system and to bringing women into that. So I also think that's a really positive way of trying to do both through leadership development programs.
Thank you. I agree. I think that this is one of the things that we're often missing as strategies to support. And if it becomes part of the program, that the funding regime to have these strategies in place, we can advance a little bit further than where we're at right now. So thank you very much. I think it's time that we move on to the next part of our session. We have 2 more speakers, and they come with a little bit different perspective. Both are doing research. So I would like to introduce, I don't need this up here. I'd like to introduce Aya and Olivia, and we'll start with Aya, who, as we've already said, is the director of the International Research Center for Sport and Gender Equity. So, Aya, if you'd like to come up. You don't.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak, to share about our work. I'm Aya Noguchi. I'm a Deputy Director at the International Research Center for Sports and Gender Equality at Seiju University. I'm also the lecturer at the Seiju University. So today I'm going to talk about the, I put some image in there for different parts. Sorry. So I'm going to talk about the project called ASEAN-Japan Action on Sports Gender Equality, which is funded by the Japanese government, working with the 10 Southeast Asian countries. So this is the brief overview of what is ASEAN. ASEAN consists of the 10 Southeast Asian countries, which is Myanmar, and Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Philippines, Brunei, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia, and Thailand. So ASEAN has a coordination organization for 10 Southeast Asian countries. So since 2012, ASEAN region has ASEAN has a sports minister meeting, and the implementation body is senior officials meeting on sports. So since 2017, Japan Japan started joining their meeting, which called AMS plus Japan and SOMS plus Japan. So since then, Japanese government are working on the sports cooperation project with the 10 Southeast Asian countries. And the uniqueness of the ASEAN countries is that whenever some make a decision, like endorsement or agreement, every country has to agree. So if one country say no, they cannot move forward. So it takes slow, but it's always a consensus-based decision-making happened. So this is a brief structure. We work with the government of Japan and ASEAN Secretariat, and work with all Southeast Asian countries. But we also ask support from GO or IWG that whenever we need expertise for sharing the information and the lecturer, we ask the international organizations to support our project. So when we started the project, and I asked the government, each government, do you have any gender issues? But they said, we treat both men and women equally. There is no gender issues. So that mostly they reply to the answer. And firstly, I didn't understand why they said, and I was thinking maybe they try to hide something the problem, because I'm outside of their countries, and I get the budget from Japan, so they like to hide something. But actually it's not. It's because their complexity of the gender norms. So they are truly believed to say that this is their culture. So why this happened, I like to show how have the gender norms in the Southeast Asian countries are constructed. So before the colonization, usually women and men are valued, the value of the women and men are equal, but different. That's their values and beliefs. And those beliefs are really attached to the religious, like Buddhism and the Muslim. So there are some instinctive differences in fatherhood, motherhood. So they put the same value, but the different way. So that's the traditional gender norms. But the colonization came, and the patriarchy social system also installed. Even like Thailand, they are never invaded by the different countries, but they are the Thailand at the time, the king of the Thailand are very admired by the UK's government system, so they installed the modernization government system. So the most of the ASEAN countries are invaded by the France and the UK or Netherlands and Spain. So though the colonization and the modernization influence really affect for the government and their social norms. But after the colonization and start independent, they start bringing back their nationalism and identity. So they think that their traditional gender norms is we are treat the men and the women equal but different. But still, the hidden power dynamics that's created by the colonization, it still exists. So that's why there is power dynamics, hidden power dynamics, but they didn't really, it's very difficult for them to realize that power dynamics because their belief is women and men are treated equal but different way. So, and then globalization and capitalism are also pushing their changing the gender norms, and now the current gender norms is created. So it's very complex history of creating the gender norms at the current Southeast Asian countries. So each country is a little bit different, but I summarize the 10 countries. And then I'm now looking at the gender norms in sports. So the gender norms in sports in diverse culture and societies are very lack of research that I found, because the gender norms in modern sports is mostly researched by the Western cultures, so which is male-dominated, heterosexism, gender binary, and westernized. But what the gender norms in sports in South Asian countries, they are gender norms in modern sports and also mixing up the current gender norms in South Asian countries. And then what the result of the gender norm in sports in the South Asian countries. But that part is very missing research. So what the benefit for women and girls gain through sports in South Asian countries people, or how the values for women and girls to play sports in their life, or how sports make women and girls' life better, or what kind of obstacles they are facing to participate in sports. Maybe the obstacle is very similar, but how the obstacle, the barriers have been created are very diverse depending on the social and cultural norms. And what the gender issues they want to prioritize to work on, which is also different. But these are the research, I think the lack of research, I couldn't find much things. So the challenges to promoting gender equality in sports in South Asian countries so their cultural value is treat women and men equally but differently. And they are difficult to recognize their hidden power dynamics between women and men. So when I ask why women and girls cannot participate in sports as much as men and boys can do, they said because the matter of popularity of sports. So the sports is used to be for men, so sports are more popular with men than women. So we need to raise the awareness of women to participate in sports. We need to change the mindset for parents to let their daughter to participate in sports. So it's they think that they need to change a mindset. But actually, there is a hidden power dynamics between women and men, or in the sports structure, or in the society, but it's sometimes overlooked. So what we like to do, our approach is to collaborate with the South Asian country, is we like to visualize the gender gap in sports, with data. And we like to visualize the benefit and obstacle for women and girls participating in sport in the specific context. So what we do is we like to support the policy development. So we use the UN Women's Sports for Generation Equality Framework. There are the 6 principles to work on. So we like to share the information, and they identify the two priority areas that they like to prioritize to work on. And also we like to share what is the mainstreaming in the gender mainstreaming in the sports policy or sports work plan. So we are introducing some toolkit and guidance for the policy development, and they start scratching their policy their sports policy. And also, we are doing the encourage each country to have the system to collect the gender segregated data. The problem of the ASEAN countries, except Malaysia, they don't have a gender segregated data for example, national participation rate or leadership position for women. So it's better to have the gender segregated data. So whenever they say, we don't have any gender issues, but the reality is that they produce the reality of the data that, but this is a gender gap, and this is a reality. So we encourage them to correct the gender segregated data, and also country-specific indicators, that because they are now working on some priority areas for the gender inequality. So we also I encourage them to identify the country-specific indicators. And we are now we're thinking to suggest the ASEAN countries' common indicators. So because ASEAN work as a group, so they like to work as a group. So if we have a common ASEAN indicators, maybe they can stimulate each other and encourage each other to work on the gender equality as a group. And then also we do the qualitative data research. So we conducted the qualitative research for each country to understand the benefit and the obstacle for women and girls to participate in sport in specific country. We visited already 6 countries. We interviewed to the women in the school, university, or women who are working for the NGO, a non-profit organization who are using sports for girls for gender equality. And we are talking to the national organization. So we, as a Japanese organization, is an outsider. So we can maybe can dig into their voices that their government cannot really hear from them because of the hierarchy, culture dynamic. So that's this is what we are doing, and I really inspired by the Indian researcher Naila Kabir. She's the researcher for the empowerment, and she said the women in the global South countries have the ability to make their own judgment about their priorities for change. So we, as a Japanese, and we are have a budget to do this project. So we understand our hidden power. So, but I don't want to push them that this is the issues for them. I don't want to do that. I want to let them. I want to share the information that I can from the international UNESCO or UN Women or IWG, GEO. I like to share the information, but I want them to decide what their priority is and what kind of issues they can capture as a gender issues. So this is this is our approach to the ASEAN countries. So I'm talking about the ASEAN country, but I'm Japan, so I'm really respect. I'm really uncomfortable to speak about the ASEAN countries as a Japanese people, but I really respect their culture and the work. So thank you very much.
Did you have a question? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Aya. That was very informative. And I'd like to now introduce our last speaker, Olivia Conrad. Thank you, Olivia. There you go.
So good morning. My name is Olivia Conrad. I am the Senior Project Officer for the European Union and the Council of Europe project called Promoting Gender Equality in Sport. And today I will be sharing with you some data preliminary findings, especially regarding 2 countries. We have 3 major pillars: data collection and analysis, best practices example, and also media sensitization. And we are partnering with the IOC, IPC, EBU, European Broadcasting Union. I invite you to follow up the session this afternoon with Pedro Diaz from the IOC and Elsa Arapi from the EBU. So the all-in plus is actually the follow-up. Yes. Okay. So the all-in plus is actually the follow-up of the all-in project, which was implemented in 2019. At that time, there were 18 countries involved, and today we have in 2024 21 project partners. You can see them on the screen. We are especially now going to focus on the data from Austria and Israel, which are ready because we are at the stage now of finalizing the analysis. So first of all, which indicators? You can see them on the screen. We've got these 6 major indicators, which of course includes leadership, coaching, and officiating. We have 3 main target groups, so the ministries of sport, national Olympic, but also Paralympic committees, and finally national federation, sport federation for both Olympic and Paralympic sport. So basically, what are the benefits of collecting data on gender equality in sport? We think that, first of all, it demonstrates the existence of inequalities, as many of you guys already said. And without this tangible evidence, any discrimination could be dismissed and thus, of course, perpetrated. And the data, secondly, will also show that the areas that needs to be addressed. So within this data collection and analysis, then we will be able to set priorities and also make better decision, better informed decision. But the idea at the end is also to create a practical recommendation. And there is an example which is concrete, the All-In Toolkit, which is a great tool. I invite you to have a look on this slide. It's a great tool which gives also practical tips for practitioners. Another tool which I think is quite relevant for researcher is the All-In Interactive Dashboard that it's still on the website. And this is a great tool if you want to make any comparison between the disciplines, but also between the sport, the countries, and of course the indicators. So this is this All-In 2019 dashboard, and we are now in the process of updating this dashboard, and it will be published at the end of the project in 2025. A few findings now. First of all, on leadership. Well, as you can see, the leadership, just a second, yeah, reported that women are still underrepresented in most of the powerful decision-making position. The number of female is actually very low in 2019. It's varied from 0 to 14%. The average is 7%. And only 20% of the board role in Olympic Sport Federation were occupied by women. So it's really highlighting the width of the gender gap in decision making. And on the contrary, there were one country which had no female president, while 6, which is a third of the whole group, had just one sport president. The analysis also revealed that in 2/3 of the countries, some sport federation did not have any female board member. The percentage varied between 4 to 52%, and only in 3 countries, so France, Finland, and Israel, all the sport federation had a female board member. But now if you look into the sport discipline, you see that gymnastics, for instance, and skating, they are discipline traditionally considered as feminine. They have a gender composition in their board, while more masculine sports, so taekwondo, boxing, biking, volleyball, and badminton, for instance, they tend to have not any female board member, or at least keep less than 10%. Now, if you look at the current situation, and if you make the comparison between Israel and Austria, and this is now the current situation in 2024, you see that the situation on gender equality in leadership has increased since 2019. For instance, the percentage of female presidents, for instance, in Austria, it has reached 17%, 11% in Israel. It was only 10 and 4% in 2019. And it's the same for vice president, with a raise from 16 to 20% in Austria and 25 to 31 in Israel. Look at the coaching indicator now. Still in 2019, the coaching indicators reported that only 22% of employed lady-level coaches in the sport federation were women. So it's still revealing the underrepresentation of female coaches in all the partner countries. But similarly to the leadership indicators, traditionally feminine sports employed more women, and masculine sports tend to have not them at all, or for instance in boxing, only 2%. But on the contrary, some disciplines are further ahead. We can see specifically in judo and football, the average is 67 and 77%. So you can see that now in the situation in 2019, still in comparison with Austria and Israel, actually the situation in gender equality in coaching has not really improved. You see that the data itself, 26% in Austria, 15% in Israel for female registered coaches. And now if you look at the percentage of elite level coaches, it has even decreased in Austria from 22 to 17%. And in Israel, there is only an increase of 1%. So this library of best practices in the European Council and Council of Europe is actually a collection of current practices that I invite you to look on our website. I will just like to name a few of them representing Austria and Israel. So gender training program, which was implemented in 2020. Next generation coaches implemented by the Israeli Olympic Committee. And also the Athena's ambassadors role modeling, which is quite famous and progressive for the country in Israel. Finally, on our website, you also have a couple of videos which are showcasing these initiatives. And it's not only Council of Europe member states, it's more globally. I invite you to have a look at these two videos. So the first one is called Lead Like a Woman. It's a great training program organized by the Finnish Olympic Committee. And then the second is Women in Sport program, and it was led by the Irish government in 25. I invite you all to look at the website and looking forward to hearing the questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So now we'll ask a few questions here. We have about 15 minutes. And I'd like to start with Aya. So Aya, your presentation illustrated the need for data to support policy. And it seems you are collecting some of this data, or have you not collected the data at this point? So, and so I'm just wondering, what steps do you believe are needed to go from the data demonstrating the issues to actually changing that policy, particularly when you're dealing with the 10 countries? And particularly hearing just how humble you are about dealing with the issues of the different countries and not trying to impose your own feelings and the Japanese sort of ethics behind it. So if you could talk about that, it would be interesting for us to hear.
Okay, thank you very much. We have done some qualitative research to interview and understand the real situation of the 6 countries, but we don't try to collect the data like numbers from our side, because I think that collecting data is the government or their NOCs should do it, because that's more sustained, and they can look for some like a ministry of other ministers have some like a census data, so they can collaborate with them to bring the data to so that kind of things I think the government and NOC should do it, because that's sustained, and we shouldn't do it. It's not yeah. But the things is the government also doesn't have a capacity to do it, and they don't know how to do it. So maybe I really like to ask you, Olivier, so because the EU also have the data, dashboard. So how do you support each countries to collect the good data, and how the capacity building should have done for them to? So, yeah, yes. So we like to support their capacity building, but from maybe the advanced researchers who are doing the more national data collections, maybe they can introduce how to do it. Those kind of things I think needed.
So you're providing them with the tools, but it's self-directed by each country then?
Yeah, we like to share the how to do it according to their own structure and capacity.
And do you find that this is actually successful in moving towards a more equitable sport environment?
Yeah, I think so. We haven't done much to introduce how to collect the data, but it's going to be a next workshop, the capacity building workshop in January. But I think that each countries now understand, oh, we need this gender segregated data. Before then, they said, oh, we don't have the data, so what? But now, oh, yes, we understand. We need to monitor the gender progression by their own, but they don't have a segregated data, so how we can take it. So that they have a motivation to take the data, so that we are going to the next step, so to introduce how to do it.
Yeah, based on your introduction, that's actually quite a motivator and a success in being able to get the countries to realize that they actually need this segregated data. So I'd ask the rest of the panel if they have any comments to add or recommendations along this line.
Yeah, I think it will be an open question, like to all the panelists, because the moment really from your presentation when you said that probably there will be a set of indicators that every country can, compare where they are, and that inevitably would motivate these countries to get higher grades on it. And my question is like how we can assure that this serves really like the purpose and improves gender equality and access for girls to sport in Southeast Asia, and not to turn it into like a tick box exercise when they really want to score high on the paper against these indicators, but culturally there is not that shift yet. Like, do you have any solution for this?
Yeah, I can speak a bit to the UK context or the England context, because we've seen this with the gender-related targets, that it's resulted in the increases I showed on the boards. But for the leadership teams that are not coming under those targets linked to funding, i.e. executive leadership teams, we're not seeing the same increases, which demonstrates, like you said, it's not sustainable, genuine change that's coming from the organization, but it's more of a tick box exercise. But within that governance code that had the targets, it was very much about working with organizations to demonstrate the process. So not just saying, okay, we need you to hit 40% by 2019, but at this point we need you to show us what steps are you putting in place to ensure that you're increasing the number of women. So it's not just about getting there, but looking about how do we get there and making that more sustainable. And yeah, I think having experts to inform organizations on how to do that and what measures are effective, I think is really important.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a comment? Aya, did you want?
Thank you for your question. Because this is the government project, so we have to work with the government. So I don't think this project can change whole things in the South Asian countries. But at least because we can work with the government, we can tell them that we should include the policy, gender mainstreaming in the policy development. And if this so, you have to make indicators to measure the progression as a government responsibility. So that's my approach. And then maybe if the government doing so, more grassroots level development happening, and in that case, maybe we can do the different approach with the different stakeholders. But now, I think because the matter of the nature of the project and now the current status of the South Asian countries, I think I think this is the way we should. This is our approach to go.
Thank you. Rachel, did you have a comment? No. In terms of Olivia, from the research and the trends in best practices and policies regarding leadership and coaching that you've discovered from your data, trends have emerged, and how can organizations benefit from this information and these trends that seem to be emerging?
I see a couple of trends emerging. I mean, I actually joined this project 2 years ago, and already in 2 years, you can see that some countries are progressing in some areas. Regarding leadership, for instance, we see a real tendency of changing the recruitment process. So there is a real tendency, and I think Lucy mentioned it, to install quota. So for instance, in France, it has been a progressive step. Now the local bodies have still another 4 years to implement the 50% parity. But the governing bodies had to be ready already in 2024. It's the same in Greece. And Greece had changed the law, and the parity will apply in January 2025. So you can see that the quota actually is helping, I think. It also includes scholarship and certification programs, development opportunities for women. And also something that I think we didn't mention yet is sometimes, specifically in certain countries, I'm mentioning for instance Georgia, we need to have male allies. Otherwise, some pathways can be created, but not really implemented in the right way. So male allies are a real asset, specifically in some region. Regarding communication strategies, I think it's clearly important. The new generation is using all this social network, and they're using very, very well. So this is also something really important to organize conferences, to showcase these actually success stories of coaches, of leader, women just thriving into their career. And without communication, we cannot develop any global approach. So this is a great opportunity today with this conference, because we are sharing our experience in a worldwide approach. Something really important as well is to adapt to the culture, because this is something that we all say today. Europe is made of so many countries. Every one of them has a specific strategy. They all keep the same indicators, which is great, but they need to adapt to the needs of the country.
Thank you. Do any of the rest of the panel have comments that they would like to make about the research and trends that it presents and how you can use it as practitioners?
Hi, yes. So I was just thinking when you were talking about the data trends, I mean, when we write applications for funding, we're always looking for a proper needs analysis of what is exactly happening in the field. And our experience is a lot of the times that we're adapting the data sets that we see. You know, for example, we're looking at, you know, employability and soft skills development from sport. And so it's difficult. You kind of have to match some employability data and soft skill data with then sport and kind of leadership and confidence. And so the more that we can have researchers working together with organizations, with sport outside of necessarily just sports science, but with the other things that sport can do, it will be really beneficial for us in being able to access funding and being able to kind of prove the benefits of the programs we're doing.
Very good point. Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I guess just an additional comment is that the numbers don't always tell us the real picture. So I guess there's a bit of a need also for how do we make qualitative data accessible, or as accessible as just giving the stats. From my own research, I found that within sport for development and peace organizations, there was a lot higher representation of women. So on average across, I think it was about 120 organizations, there was about 45% women's representation on boards. However, digging a bit deeper, it was clear that women might have been sitting on the boards, but there were very few women founders of organizations who held ultimate decision-making power. So it's kind of like the board statistics don't necessarily reflect what's actually going on in the organization. And with sport for development and peace organizations, often they're smaller, more agile sort of governance structures, not so hierarchical as sport organizations. So that founder really holds a central role. And the vast majority were men. So I just think, yeah, we need to not always think, okay, 40% women on boards equals 40% of the influence within the organization.
I agree to that, but I won't go into it. Well, is there anyone else with a comment here? Oh, well, I'd like to thank all of you. This was very informative for all of us. So thank you, Lucy, Sergey, Rachel, Aya, and Olivia for sharing this information. And I hope that they've given you some ideas and some rationale for sharing research and information and how it can really help to drive change needed to build a more gender equitable sports sector. So from today, we have examples from the grassroots organizations to high-level administration of the sports sector, and hopefully you've gained a better understanding from the data that they've presented and the landscape and ecosystem of sport, and that you're leaving the session with ideas on how research-based results can actually guide practitioners, and actually vice versa. I think we had a bit of a discussion on that yesterday, where practitioners really can guide the research that's needed to assist in their program development. So overall providing us with a more engaging environment for girls and women to participate. So as demonstrated over the last 30 years, there's been some changes, minor in some ways, and yet maybe there are a lot more programs than there ever have been, and there's more programs that are segregated specifically for women or detailed for women. So this is being demonstrated today. So I would like to thank you, and I think all of us understand the value of continued education and training, and ensuring the training and education is actually reducing those barriers for girls and women, and is a motivation rather than a barrier. So thanks, and how can research meet the needs of the practitioners, and how can the practitioners meet the needs of research to advance us in achieving better systems? So I'll turn it over to Ben now. So thank you, Ben, for this opportunity to present today. Thank you.
Thank you again to our panelists. Just as I have a lot of notes to summarize quickly, but I think moving in this focus from research to action, one of the things that stood out to me is that we might say simply that the best program is the implemented program, that there are lots of alterations and conditions that we might have to make, compromises, adaptations culturally, linguistically, but to see the effects from these programs, we have those effects because the programs actually happened and were implemented. So with that, I would like to also introduce our next speaker. We have Esther Igobamian-Mshelia, who is the Vice Chair of UN's CEDAW Committee. A late arrival today, but welcome to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. And my apologies, I really thought I would be here earlier, but the trains and the rain and the weather tried to conspire, but they didn't succeed. I am here, and I'm really delighted that we're able to make these connections today. And it's a good thing I came in between, because as I came in, I heard some of the issues and challenges and barriers that we consider as a committee. Many of you may not know, but the CEDAW committee is one of the normative frameworks that takes and monitors progress towards actualizing women's empowerment and addressing elimination of discrimination against women. Many of you might not even know that that committee, all the state parties report to the committee regularly. And there are 16 operational articles. And so, as I sit here today, we are in session in Geneva, and I bring you warm greetings from all the members of the committee. They're tracking this, they're wanting to know how do we deepen, because Article 13, Articles 1, 3, 4, 7, these are all the articles that address the human rights dimensions to sports and gender, which we as a committee often try to hold state parties accountable to, but without inputs from the beautiful people that I see here, it makes it really difficult. Why do we consider, not only is this an article in the convention, but the global sports market industry is anticipated to reach over 623 billion by 2027. And women make up only 26.9%, that's roughly 30% of the executive leadership. I heard you say 20%. Well, report that we have is that there's a slight uptake, and most of the international sports federations have women in them, but we find that only these federations, out of these federations, only less than 10% are led by women. And so when we engaged first with the Global Observatory, it was in the wings or in the aftermath of the Women's World Cup and all the fracas that came out of there. And that was when I think awareness began to dawn that some of the issues that we encounter in the sports sector really need to be addressed from the human rights perspective. So we look at human rights dimensions, and what we've observed is that cultural bias, unequal compensation, policy and regulatory restrictions, sexual harassment, among other factors, are really what hinder representation of women in politics. But as we talk about what hinders women, it's also good to know that CEDAW itself, puts a demand or requires that state parties report, as I said earlier on, and there are other declarations that we work with. We use the Beijing Platform for Action. We use the SDGs. We use regional protocols, because I heard the Asian group talking. And when you add and combine these instruments together, it makes them powerful tools to help state parties, one, to fulfill their obligations, because there are 4 core obligations that state parties have, including in relations to sports. That's to respect the convention, to protect citizens, to promote the ideals of the convention, and to report on it, to fulfill and report. And so when we take reports from state parties, what we're looking at is, are they ensuring that there's direct or indirect discrimination? And in the area of sports, there's a lot of that. Are they undertaking due diligence in all their territories and their jurisdictions? Do they exercise the power that they have to deliver on the promises of the convention to women, particularly in the areas of sports? And do they have mechanisms in place to help to realize that? And often what we find is, although state parties try to protect human rights, there is a gross underreporting on Article 13, which is on sports and recreation. Many state parties provide no report whatsoever of the systems they have in place, the policies, the rules, the sanctions, and all of the measures that they have put in place. And so for us, engaging with people like you, because the CEDAW convention is one of those that has a window called the shadow reporting. And the shadow reporting window is where you get the opportunity to prepare your reports. Like I had the Asian, I had the training. It would be interesting to have those, particularly when those countries are reporting. And when they do, it gives us the opportunity to hold them accountable to what they need to do: financing, investment, regulation, training. And so why do people fail to apply or to utilize the convention? Because one, there's limited knowledge and awareness, and I think that's a principal reason why we're here today trying to deepen this partnership, because you are the actors on the field. If you understand the provisions of the convention, you know the tools that are there, you know the obligations, and you know the pathways, then it is really easy to be able to deliver on the convention. Rhetoric is evident, a lot of policies and plans, but no delivery or accountability mechanisms. And understanding and addressing gender in sports power dynamics, particularly in the architecture, the operational systems, that they've locked women out, but we've not undertaken sufficient research to correlate Why do we have those lockouts, and what can we do to effectively reduce them? That's many slides on. You will get the presentation, so I will guess you just listen to me while I run through this. Lack of inadequate institutional arrangements and understanding who pays for what, because I heard about financing. How do you deliver gender-responsive budgeting when it relates to sports? And then how do you operate an effective gender-responsive whistleblower? I had an audit. I was really interested to know that people are thinking of an audit, but what we find is the whistleblower system is very weak, is poorly regulated, poorly understood, and when that is absent or unavailable, then when there are issues in the sporting arena, it's difficult to deal with them. How do women wield or muster authority to influence change within the sports arena if you're in such few numbers in the leadership? And of course, we also know that there are limited private sector investment. Those are issues that we have seen as a committee. And I thought before I leave, I would share with you there are case studies of how the committee has taken up gender equality issues in sports to hold state parties accountable. One of the most recent and our groundbreaking is the Olympics. The Olympics that were held in France. Last year we had a dialogue with France in the preparation towards the Olympic. I took Article 13 and we inquired about their preparations for the sports, how inclusive it was, the gender tools and the gender systems in place, and placed a demand on them in the concluding observations. And I bet you, the Olympics that was held in France is precedential. It was the first inclusive Olympics that was held. It had a family room, it had space for women, it had facilities that cater to both men and women, and families that supported the athletes. And so why come to the committee? Because when you work with the committee and you submit reports, you engage with us, you understand how to utilize our various windows and entry points, that's a pathway to strengthening inclusive sports and to dealing with gender and human rights issues within the sports arena. You can see all of the countries. With Iceland, we had issues with them because they didn't have parity in their pay. There was a gender pay gap in the sporting arena, in the sports sector in Iceland. In Singapore, they actually introduced a solution which called the futsal. The futsal was considered to be sexist because then it moved from one kind of discrimination to another extreme of discrimination. In Kuwait, we had issues with them. France, I talked about, and with Tajikistan, we found that there were actually no sporting or recreational activities at all in the state party. And so our recommendation to them was that they should try to make amends. And so from this engagement, what should we be looking at? Because I believe that today we're opening up new pathways for us to work with actors in the sporting arena, to strengthen partnerships between the committee and sports stakeholders with a view to increasing women's human rights protection in the sporting arena. The second is to increase direct engagement between the committee and the Global Observatory and other sports stakeholders. The third, so that we can better uphold the standards, because CEDAW represents the standards for rights protection for women, particularly in the area of sport. Deepen collaboration that focused on providing technical and other advisory services. I had questions around that, lack of technical capacity. That's why the committee exists. And then jointly developing model and innovative approaches and good practices like the France that we can share with other actors, we can share with institutions, and we can then use that to accelerate the pace of reducing gender inequalities in the sporting arena. I thank you very much for the little window that I got, and I'm looking forward to the outcome of this conference and to engaging more with actors, particularly the Global Observatory. Thank you very much.